The enemy called the fortress a coffin long before they breached its skies. It was not grand, not shining, not even alive by their standards. Just stone, steel, and dust pressed against the bones of a nameless world, one more relic of human desperation clinging to the dark. The arcs of fleets circled it for 3 days before they struck. Their war scribes filled the channels with laughter, mocking the primitive human shape of the defenses, walls and towers, as if arrows still decided wars. They broadcast images across their empire of armored beasts grinding through dirt, while their ships split the clouds with fire. A funeral song before the first death. On the 4th dawn, they descended. The Arxith were born hunters, armored in jagged plates. Every battle to them was ritual, the prey broken, the silence claimed. They stormed the fortress expecting screams. What they found instead were humans behind scorched walls, thin and pale, eyes burned hollow from sleeplessness, mouths cracked from rationed water. No begging. No songs. Only the rasp of wind through shattered concrete. The first breach was easy. Too easy. Their claws ripped through barricades like paper. They poured in, shouting the names of their kills before they struck. But the humans did not answer. They fired from shadows, then slipped back into tunnels, leaving their dead where they fell. The silence began to grow teeth. At first the Arxith thought it was fear. Prey always hid. Prey always whimpered. Yet these humans did not run far enough. They reappeared at the edges, gaunt faces watching through rifle sights, striking and vanishing. The aliens found the same soldier twice in one day, shot, bleeding, crawling forward with a weapon still clutched in his hand. They called him the Hollow Man. He should have died in the morning, but by nightfall he was still there. Commanders laughed. They linger like rot, one sneered, but rot always yields to flame. So they brought flame. The fortress burned. Entire wings collapsed. Towers folded inward. The Arxith howled in triumph until, from under the ash, figures rose coughing, blistered, staggering, still holding rifles like they were fused to their bones. Something curdled in the invaders' pride. That first week the Arxith lost 3,000 soldiers. A trifle, they said. A scratch. Yet none of the fallen were reclaimed. The humans dragged them away into tunnels. At night the aliens heard strange noises from below, metal against stone, rhythmic, endless. Work. Digging. Building. As if the humans, instead of dying, were multiplying under the ground. The siege stretched. 100 nights. 200. They pushed harder, but the fortress would not yield. Food should have failed. Ammunition should have run dry. Yet every assault met gunfire. Every choke point cost blood. Then came the first whisper of dread. A scout pack vanished in the underlevels. 6 hunters. Nothing returned. A cohort went down after them. All they found were bones. Not human bones. The armor plates of their own, cracked and split, lined along the walls like trophies. 4 words smeared in blood, alien blood, in the old tongue of Earth. We do not stop. The commander hissed. Rage carried him back to the channels, showing the fortress under bombardment, walls caving, corridors shattered. They are shadows in a grave, he declared. The dawn will burn them out. Dawn came. The fortress answered. The silence had changed. No longer absence. now a presence. Thick, unblinking. Soldiers dreamed of humans standing in the ruins, eyes black, skin pale as ash. They did not fall, even in sleep. Priests warned of contagion, fear itself spreading like a toxin. The commander silenced them, though even he felt it in the marrow of his plates. Something about this prey did not behave as prey should. By the 300th night, the laughter had stopped. The Arksith still killed thousands. They razed the outer walls. They painted stone with human blood. Yet every morning, more figures stood at the breaches, bandaged, limping, coughing, but alive. One hunter whispered, "They're already dead. We're fighting their ghosts." The commander tore him apart before the ranks. But whispers do not bleed. They multiply. On the 400th night, during a breach, a human was cornered. No weapon. No strength left in him. Bones showing under skin. The Arksith warrior raised his blade, laughing, savoring the ritual of the kill. The human looked up. And smiled. It was not defiance. Not madness. It was colder, the smile of someone who already knew the ending, and knew it was not written for the hunter. The warrior struck. The human caught the blade with both hands. Flesh split. Tendons tore. He did not fall. He pulled the alien close, blood pouring down his arms, and rasped one word through broken breath. "Stay." When they found them, the alien was dead. The human too. But his eyes remained open, staring into the dark as if still waiting. Both bodies were burned. But no one laughed again. The siege dragged into its second year. By then food should have failed a dozen times over. The fortress was a ruin, half its walls gone. Still the humans endured. Shadows of flesh and will, skeletal and coughing blood. Yet they endured. The silence at dawn became their banner. Every morning the hunters waited for collapse, and every morning the fortress exhaled gunfire. On the 700th night, the commander called for reinforcements. Not for numbers, but because something was breaking inside his hunters. The sky filled with warships and engines. The horizon burned. Towers of fire crushed the planet. When the dust cleared, the fortress was nothing but stone and smoke. The commander declared the coffin sealed. Then the ground shook. Hatchways burst from the rubble. Humans climbed out, gaunt, staggering, weapons clutched in shaking hands. Not dozens. Not hundreds. Thousands. They had tunneled through the earth. Eating roots. Drinking condensation. Binding wounds with ash and wire. Worms turned into something else. The Arksith army froze. Their commander lifted his blade to order the charge. And then he stopped. From the throat of every human rose the same sound. Not words. Not screams. A ragged exhalation, drawn out and endless. Breathing. The sound of the dead refusing to be dead. The Arksith had no word for it. Humans had one. Survivors. The silence at dawn was broken, and it was not theirs. The commander opened his mouth to give the order, to drown this horror once and for all. But the words never came. Because through the smoke, limping among the 1,000 walking scars, was the Hollow Man. The Hollow Man walked at the front of them, dragging one leg behind the other, rifle hanging useless at his side. He should have been dead 100 times over. Every Arksith soldier had seen him fall. They had marked his corpse in their ledgers. And yet here he was, pale as bone, eyes burning like coals, refusing to vanish. The commander felt his throat tighten. Orders clung to his tongue like ash. His hunters waited for the call to charge, but none of them moved forward. The sound of the humans' breathing filled the silence, steady and ragged, louder than war drums. Then the humans lifted their rifles. The first volley tore through the front line of hunters. Carapace split, ichor sprayed across the blackened ground. The Arksith responded in fury, charging at last, a tide of blades and claws and armored beasts. The two forces met in the ruins with a sound like worlds breaking. Humans fought like dying men who had forgotten how to fall. Every shot landed with precision, every blade wrestled down with bare hands if needed. Even when struck open, they dragged themselves back to their feet. One soldier with half a face fired point-blank into the chest of a beast before being crushed beneath it. Another, bleeding from the stomach, jammed his last grenade into an alien's throat and grinned as he pulled the pin. The Arksith killed them by the hundreds. The ground grew slick with blood. But still the line held. Still the fortress breathed. By nightfall, the invaders had gained nothing. Their dead lay scattered across the ruins, their beasts limping back broken, their warriors gasping with exhaustion. The humans had been torn apart, and yet there they were, shadows staggering back into the earth, dragging the wounded with them as if they were gathering fuel for another day. The commander raged. He called down bombardments until the planet shook. He sent wave after wave into the tunnels. And every time, silence swallowed his hunters whole. They did not return. Only their screams echoed from below. On the 9th day of renewed battle, something new appeared. A line of Arksith corpses was dragged up from the tunnels and left in the open. Each one was arranged in the same posture, kneeling, heads bowed, claws broken. And behind them, painted across the wall in human blood, were 4 words again. "You cannot bury us." The soldiers began to murmur. Some claimed they saw human shapes moving in the ash at night, shapes that did not bleed when struck. Others swore the Hollow Man had been killed again, shot through the skull this time, yet stood at the wall the next dawn. The commander silenced all talk with executions, but the fear was real. It crept into the ranks, colder than the fortress guns. Every dawn, the silence pressed heavier on them, and every dawn the humans broke it first. The reinforcements turned from arrogance to dread. They unleashed heavier weapons, flamestorms that turned entire districts into glass, sonic cannons that shattered stone and bone alike. Still, from beneath the ruins, the humans clawed their way back up. And then, on the 1000th night, the Arksith tried something they had never done before. They offered terms. A channel was opened. The commander's voice, sharp and metallic, carried across the ruins. "Humans! End this. You are finished. Surrender and you will be given swift deaths." For a long moment there was nothing. No answer. No movement. Just the slow rasp of wind and smoke curling over the ruins. Then a voice crackled through the static. Human, rough, broken by dust and thirst. "Come and take it." The words hit harder than artillery. They echoed through the alien ranks, striking deeper than any bullet. The commander roared and ordered the final push. All engines fired. All soldiers charged. The sky itself burned red with plasma. When the smoke cleared, the fortress was gone, flattened, nothing but a scar on the planet. At last, the Arksith believed it done. But the silence returned. Heavier. Thicker. And then, as dawn broke, the Hollow Man stepped through the ash. The Hollow Man stepped through the ash at dawn. His silhouette wavered in the smoke, gaunt and torn, but upright. Behind him, shapes began to emerge, dozens, then hundreds, each dragging themselves forward like shades rising from the grave. The Arksith line faltered. Hunters who had faced firestorms without blinking now gripped their weapons tighter, claws trembling. The commander hissed for order, but even his voice carried strain. They had seen the fortress obliterated. They had watched human bodies turn to vapor. And yet here these figures stood, breathing, limping, alive. One of the younger hunters broke rank, rushing forward with a roar to cut the Hollow Man down. He swung his blade across the human's chest, splitting flesh open. The man did not stop. He took another step forward, blood soaking his shirt, eyes fixed on the alien like a nail hammered through steel. Then he raised his ruined rifle, pressed it against the Arksith's throat, and pulled the trigger. Both fell. The Hollow Man hit the dirt, chest torn open. The hunter collapsed beside him, neck shattered. For a heartbeat, silence returned. The commander smirked, forcing confidence back into his voice. See? They bleed. They die. But then the Hollow Man stirred. His arms trembled as he pushed himself upright, coughing blood, dragging his broken body back to his feet. He raised the empty rifle like a banner and took another step forward. The Arksith line broke. Soldiers staggered backward, stumbling into one another. The commander roared at them, but his voice no longer carried authority. The sight of prey refusing to remain dead gnawed through discipline, through instinct, through everything they had ever known. The humans advanced slowly, step by step, silent except for their ragged breaths. It was not a charge. It was not even a fight. It was inevitability. The Arksith fired into them. Plasma bolts tore through human bodies. Limbs were severed, skulls split. Still they moved forward. Even when they collapsed, they crawled. Even when they could not crawl, they reached. A tide of broken figures pressing ever closer, wearing their own death-like armor. By midday, the battlefield had turned into a mire of corpses, both alien and human. But the humans did not withdraw. They fought until their fingers snapped against triggers, until their teeth broke biting into alien flesh. They refused to fall alone. The commander pulled his forces back. Not far, just beyond the ruins, regrouping in the smoking wasteland. But in truth, it was a retreat. The silence at dawn was no longer something to conquer. It was something to flee. That night, around their campfires, the hunters whispered. Some swore the Hollow Man was not one man at all, but many, a face worn by whoever rose next. Others believed the humans had learned to bind their souls into their bones, rising again no matter how often they were struck down. A few said nothing at all, only staring into the dark, waiting for shapes to appear. The commander demanded silence, demanded obedience, but his own sleep was broken by dreams. In them, he stood on endless ash plains. The humans surrounded him, eyeless and grinning, their breaths rasping like waves against stone. And always, at the front, was the Hollow Man, reaching for him with hands that never stopped bleeding. By the dawn of the 1001st night, the Arksith knew the truth. They had come to claim silence, to bury humanity beneath their claws. Instead, the silence had turned against them, thick and suffocating, filled with breaths that would not cease. So they tried to end it with finality. The fleet gathered above the planet. Massive vessels, each one bristling with firepower enough to shatter continents. They aligned their weapons on the ruins and began the countdown to glass the entire hemisphere. The humans watched from below, faces lit by the glow of charging cannons. They did not run. They did not scream. They simply raised their weapons, aiming at the sky as if their rifles could pierce the void itself. A gesture not of battle, but of defiance. The commander hesitated. He could feel the weight of that silence pressing even up into orbit. If they fired, if they burned everything, would it truly end? Or would those ragged silhouettes still rise from the ashes, breathing, walking, forever? The order stuck in his throat. He looked at his soldiers, saw the cracks in their carapace, the hollow in their eyes. Predators, once certain of their supremacy, now afraid of the prey. He clenched his fists. This should have been their triumph. Instead, it felt like a trap, one that had been closing slowly for 1,000 nights. On the ground, the hollow man lifted his rifle again. Empty. Broken. Still raised like a promise. The commander slammed his claw against the control. And then the fleet's cannons charged to full. The sky blazed. The ground shook beneath the humans' feet. The silence deepened, heavy as a held breath. And at the very moment the order was about to fall, a new sound broke through the static of the battlefield. Not human. Not Arxith. A third signal. A warning tone that echoed across the fleet's comms, shrill and piercing, overriding all channels. The commander froze. His soldiers looked to the sky, confusion spreading like fire. The signal repeated, louder, sharper, as if it came from the bones of the planet itself. The humans lowered their rifles, one by one, and began to smile. The ground cracked open. The ground cracked open beneath the ruins, a sound like the spine of the world splitting apart. Dust billowed into the sky, drowning the sunrise in a choking red haze. The Arxith line staggered, claws sinking into fractured stone as the earth groaned beneath their weight. At first they thought it was an earthquake. A natural convulsion, the planet breaking under the strain of bombardments. But the sound did not fade. It grew. A deep, rhythmic pounding, not chaos but pattern. Not collapse, work. The same hammering the scouts had once heard in the tunnels, now magnified 1,000 times over. From the fissures in the ground came light. Not fire. Not molten stone. A steady glow, pale and cold, leaking upward as if the humans had dragged the stars themselves into the dirt. The commander barked orders, forcing his hunters to steady. "It is trickery," he growled. A last gasp. A grave pretending to breathe. Yet his own voice faltered. No trick could shake the bedrock of a planet. The fissures widened. Stone slabs split apart and fell into the abyss. And then something began to rise. Not machines, at least, not by alien reckoning. These were jagged towers of metal and bone, welded together from shipwrecks, girders, corpses. Great engines throbbed with scavenged power, cables running like veins, spewing sparks into the night. The humans had not simply hidden underground. They had built. They had turned their tomb into a foundry. The first tower broke free of the earth with a shriek of tearing rock. At its base, humans swarmed like ants, guiding it upward with pulleys and chains, faces gaunt but steady. At its crown, artillery barrels, alien, human, mismatched, pivoted toward the sky. The commander's throat tightened. This was not survival. This was creation. In the shadow of annihilation, the prey had become something else. The cannons of the fleet above screamed to life, searing beams lancing downward. They struck the rising towers, tearing holes through steel and flesh. Humans burned by the hundreds. But the towers did not stop climbing. More chains strained. More hands bled against pulleys. The broken lifted the broken higher still. And then the first tower fired. The shot ripped through the sky, crude and uneven, a beam of raw power stolen from scavenged alien cores. It tore into an Arxith ship, splitting its hull in half. Fire blossomed against the horizon. For the first time in the siege, it was not only silence the humans broke. It was the heavens. The hunters screamed. The commander roared for them to hold the line, to press forward and burn the towers before more could rise. But the ground kept opening. More structures clawed their way into daylight, spires of ruin and will, belching fire toward the sky. And through it all, the humans marched forward. Not fast. Not strong. But unstoppable. Every step fueled by something the Arxith had no name for. The Hollow Man was at their center, chest bound in rags, face streaked with soot, rifle clutched like a relic. Plasma fire tore through the ground around him, but he did not flinch. He walked as if the battlefield belonged to him already, as if death itself had lost the right to touch him. An Arxith hunter broke, shrieking, hurling his weapon aside as he fled into the smoke. Others followed, not from wounds but from fear, tripping over rubble as they scrambled back toward the fleet's shadow. The commander watched his line dissolve. He struck one fleeing soldier down, cleaving his skull open, but it did not slow the tide of panic. The silence at dawn had grown too loud, too heavy. It pressed on their minds until instinct itself cracked. Above, another ship exploded, torn apart by scavenged fire. Burning fragments rained onto the battlefield, scattering hunters like insects beneath falling stone. Humans staggered too, crushed beneath wreckage, but even then they clawed out from beneath, dragging weapons and wounded with them. The commander roared until his throat bled. Stand! Stand and kill them! They are carrion. They are nothing. But even he knew it was a lie. Carrion did not build towers from their own bones. Carrion did not rise from graves to stare down the sky. He turned his gaze to the Hollow Man. Their eyes met across the ruins, hunter and prey, predator and shadow. For the first time in 1,000 nights, the commander felt something colder than rage sliding into his chest. Fear. The Hollow Man raised his rifle. Empty. Shattered. Still, he lifted it steady, sighting the commander as if daring him to move. The commander's claws trembled on his blade. His soldiers had always believed silence was theirs to claim. But now he understood the truth. Silence belonged to humanity. They wore it, carried it, bent it into a weapon. The sky split again. Another ship died screaming, falling in fire. The battlefield shook with the thunder of collapsing steel. The commander dropped his gaze, for the first time unable to meet the eyes of prey. And as the towers kept rising from the earth, as the humans marched forward through blood and fire, as silence pressed into every soul on the field, one truth became clear. The siege was no longer a hunt. It was a reckoning. The Arksith had thought the coffin was for humanity. But the Thousand Knights had built something else entirely. A grave large enough for an empire. The commander stood in the wreckage of his own certainty. 1,000 nights of siege, and still the humans had not fallen. The towers of ruin clawed upward, vomiting fire into the sky, while the Hollow Man led his shadows across the battlefield like a procession of the dead. For the first time in his life, the commander did not feel like a hunter. He felt like prey. The fleet above roared in panic. Voices flooded the comms, captains demanding orders, priests chanting war hymns to steady the ranks, hunters screaming as their ships cracked open under the stolen guns of the fortress. The commander snarled back at them, forcing his words through the static. "Hold your ground. Burn them to ash. They cannot endure forever." But his hunters no longer believed it. The silence at dawn had been broken too many times. Every death had returned to them. Every victory had turned to dust. Now even the strongest among them felt the weight pressing down. It was not the strength of human claws or weapons. It was something far worse, persistence. The commander refused to bend. He would not let centuries of conquest unravel at the hands of fragile prey. If strength was not enough, then fear must be. He gave the order for the war beasts. From the belly of transports came the creatures bred for extinction wars, towering monsters of flesh and steel, chained with living armor, mouths packed with fire. They thundered into the ruins, claws cracking stone, bellies roaring with plasma. Their handlers howled, urging them forward, a tide of living engines meant to sweep away anything still standing. For a moment, the Arksith rallied. The beasts tore into the humans, ripping bodies apart, spitting flame into the tunnels. The ground burned, and the air filled with ash thick enough to blind. But the humans did not break. They threw themselves at the beasts with a kind of madness. Men and women leapt onto armored backs, stabbing into seams with knives and pipes, jamming explosives into jaws. Entire squads were swallowed alive, yet inside those beasts the detonations came seconds later, splitting them open from within. Hunters watched in horror as gaunt silhouettes climbed from the gore, coated in blood, dragging their rifles with them. One beast went down thrashing, spine snapped by a cable looped and dragged by dozens of human hands. Another bellowed fire until its lungs collapsed from grenades stuffed down its throat. The battlefield shook with dying roars, and when the smoke cleared, the beasts were carcasses strewn among the rubble. The silence returned heavier than before. The commander's claws dug into his palms. He wanted to scream, to deny what he had just seen. But the eyes of his soldiers were already wide with disbelief. Their beasts, their monsters, their certainty broken. And still the humans came on, limping, coughing, bleeding, but never stopping. He tried another tactic. "Look at them," he shouted, voice cracking the comms. "They are nothing but bone and shadow. They cannot fight forever. Every drop of blood they spill weakens them. Push, and they will collapse." Yet as he spoke, a shape rose at the front of the human line. The Hollow Man. He moved with no grace, each step dragging him deeper into ruin, chest wrapped in filthy bandages, face a mask of scars. He had been cut, burned, and broken more times than any being should survive. But his eyes still burned with the same coal fire. When he lifted his rifle, shattered, empty, useless, every Arksith hunter felt the weight of it.
Not as a weapon. As a sentence.
The silence at dawn belonged to him.
The humans around him raised their weapons too.
Some held rifles without magazines, some only bent pipes or sharpened metal.
It did not matter. They raised them anyway.
The commander's chest tightened. The vision felt wrong.
This was not prey. This was not even war.
This was ritual.
And it was not his. Desperation clawed through his thoughts.
He gave the order for orbital fire.
Not bombardment, annihilation.
The fleet was to turn the ruins, the humans, and every hunter still on the ground into glass. He would sacrifice them all if it ended this nightmare.
The ships obeyed.
Their cannons flared, charging to full, the sky glowing white. Hunters looked up, some in awe, others in fear. Humans kept marching forward, rifles still raised, eyes fixed on their enemy as if the light meant nothing. The commander's voice shook with fury.
Now! Burn them! The sky thundered.
But the beams did not fall. Every cannon froze mid-charge, energy spiking and then dying.
Across the calms came screams of confusion, systems failing, circuits burned out. The towers below had struck again, their mismatched weapons spewing interference into the heavens, their scavenged power cores jamming alien fire.
The fleet shuddered in silence, blind and choking in its own failure.
The humans did not pause.
They advanced through the ruins, shadows and smoke, every step hammering into the hearts of their hunters.
The commander's rage broke into panic. He turned on his officers, hissing, striking, demanding something, anything, to end this.
But when he looked into their eyes, he saw only emptiness. The kind of emptiness he had once believed was his species' right to inflict on others. Now it stared back at him from his own soldiers.
The hollow man stopped walking.
He stood in the ruins, chest rising and falling in shallow breaths, rifle raised like a standard. Behind him, thousands of humans halted as one. The silence pressed in, suffocating, absolute. And then he lowered the rifle, pointing it straight at the commander. No words. No cries. Just that gesture. The hunters froze. The commander felt his throat close. It was as if the world itself had turned against him, all light narrowing to that single figure, that empty rifle aimed like a judgment. The silence broke not with a scream, but with a sound more terrible. Laughter. A human, gaunt and half dead, laughed from the ranks. Another joined. Then another. Soon the battlefield echoed with a chorus of broken voices, laughter dry and cracked, laughter that should not exist in the mouth of prey. Laughter that belonged to those who had already won. The commander staggered back, bile rising in his throat. His hunters shrank from the sound, claws trembling, carapaces rattling in fear. And in that moment, he understood. The siege had never been about walls or weapons. It had never been about numbers. It was about endurance. Pain as fuel. Persistence as a weapon. Humanity had bled for 1,000 nights, and in their bleeding they had found something stronger than claws, stronger than fire. They had found the silence. The commander dropped his blade. It hit the ground with a hollow ring, swallowed by the laughter of the humans who would not die. And as dawn rose again over the ruined fortress, he knew the truth he could never admit aloud. The hunters had become the hunted. The empire was not supposed to fracture. The Arksith had ruled the spiral arms for 1,000 generations, binding worlds in chains, burning resistance down to ash. Yet now, word of the siege spread faster than the fleet could silence it.
Whispers traveled from outpost to outpost, carried on broken calms and deserters' tongues.
The prey would not die. Ships fled their stations. Garrisons locked their gates and refused to march. Priests howled in fury, demanding obedience, but even their chants rang hollow.
The hunters who had once crushed planets now woke sweating, hearing laughter echoing in their dreams.
The commander still stood in the ruins, clawed hands trembling as the hollow man's silent judgment pinned him in place. His officers surrounded him, waiting for orders he could not give. Every instinct screamed at him to retreat, to escape the sight of those gaunt silhouettes standing unbroken in the smoke. Yet to retreat was to admit the unthinkable, that humans had endured what no species should. So he ordered another push. The hunters obeyed, but their charge was slow, dragging, poisoned by fear. The humans met them without flinching. A boy who looked no older than 15 drove a bayonet into the throat of a beast twice his size. A woman with half an arm strapped a detonator to her chest and tackled an alien officer into the fire. Blood and ash filled the air, and still the humans fought on. For every one that fell, another seemed to rise. Not stronger, not faster, just there. Refusing to vanish. The commander's mind cracked around it. Victory was numbers. Victory was weapons. Victory was the certainty that prey bent beneath the hunter. But here, all of that meant nothing. These humans did not break. They did not yield. They fought as if death itself was beneath them. By the time the sun burned high, the Arxith ranks were broken again. The hunters stumbled back through the ruins, their dead littering the ground, their beasts dragging themselves away in silence. The commander roared, ordering them to regroup, to hold, but his words carried no weight anymore. That night, the fortress lit its fires. Hundreds of them, burning in the ruins like stars. From the fleet above, the sight was unbearable, a dead world refusing to stay silent. Messages flooded the empire. The siege had lasted 1,000 nights. The humans were still alive. Every world that heard the rumors stiffened in quiet defiance. If prey could endure, perhaps others could too. The Arxith priests declared it blasphemy, a lie spread by cowards. They ordered entire colonies purged for repeating the tale. But purges only fanned the fire. Hunters began to ask questions in private. Captains refused orders. Some ships never returned from patrol. The empire cracked at its edges. On the battlefield, the commander's fury turned to desperation. He sent assassins into the tunnels, hunters trained in silence and shadow. None returned. He unleashed weapons banned by every code of war: neurotoxins, corrosive storms, collapsing singularities. Still, when dawn came, the hollow man stood in the ruins, smoke curling around him, rifle raised like a banner. And every morning, the silence broke. Sometimes with laughter. Sometimes with a gunshot. Sometimes with nothing more than the sound of boots on stone. It was enough. The fleet began to dissolve. Captains ignored his summons. Hunters deserted in the night. Supplies dwindled. Even the beasts grew restless, refusing their handlers, tearing at chains until they were put down. The commander stood in the ruins of his own power, choking on the realization that his army was not undone by strength or strategy but by endurance. On the 999th dawn, a ship broke ranks. Instead of joining the bombardment, it turned its guns on its allies. The sky filled with fire as fleets tore into each other, suspicion snapping into mutiny. In the chaos, more ships fled into the void. The siege lines collapsed. The commander howled, his voice raw, but no one listened. His own soldiers stared at him with eyes full of something worse than fear, emptiness. They had nothing left to believe in. And the humans knew it. That night, the fortress gates opened. For the first time in 1,000 nights, they came out of the ruins in force. Thin, bloodied, wrapped in bandages and ash, but walking with steady steps. Hundreds of them. Thousands. More than the commander had ever counted, more than should have been possible after so much death. They marched into the open plain, torches in hand, the hollow man at their front. His shadow stretched long across the ground, cast by flames that would not die. The hunters froze. No command could make them move. The hollow man raised his rifle high. And the silence broke again, not with words, not with laughter, but with the sound of thousands of boots striking the earth in unison. A rhythm older than war, a sound that did not belong to prey. The commander fell to his knees. He wanted to scream, to deny what he saw, but the truth was already carved into the marrow of every hunter who watched. The silence at dawn was not theirs anymore. It belonged to the humans. And in that silence, the empire itself began to die. The cracks spread like fractures in glass. At first, they were whispers, an outpost refusing to answer a summons, a captain feigning engine failure to avoid deployment, a priest strangled in the dark by his own guards. Then they widened. Fleets turned on each other. Colonies defied their overseers. In worlds that had once bowed in silence, the name of humanity was spoken with a kind of dangerous reverence. The empire had no language for this. Conquest was simple, prey was taken, chained, or burned. Resistance was crushed. Nothing lingered. But the humans had lingered. They had survived 1,000 nights of siege, and that story carried further than the commander's desperate lies. Hunters began to dream of ash-streaked faces and hollow eyes that would not blink. Entire garrisons went sleepless, waiting for the laughter to reach their walls. The commander still clung to the battlefield. His fortress of command was half rubble, his fleet fractured, his soldiers brittle with fear. But he would not leave. Pride chained him more tightly than duty. To abandon the ruins was to admit the unthinkable, that prey had defeated them not in strength but in will. He would not let that truth stand. He tried to rally them one last time. The night was black with smoke. The surviving arcs of soldiers knelt before him in broken ranks, their carapaces dull, their eyes hollow. The commander raised his blade, voice cracking against the silence. Hunters do not flee. Hunters do not bow. This world is ours, and we will take it. The words fell flat. Even as he spoke, the sound carried from the ruins, the steady rhythm of boots against stone. The humans were marching again, not hidden, not scattered, but in formation. Torchlight gleamed off battered helmets and rifles held upright like banners. Thousands of them, stepping in time, every pace striking the ground like a drumbeat. The commander's voice faltered. His hunters shrank back. Some whispered curses. Others simply stared. One dropped his weapon without realizing it. The hollow man walked at their front, dragging one leg, rifle raised. He should not have been alive. None of them should. But the humans marched with the weight of inevitability, as if each step erased the 1,000 nights behind them and carved a future ahead. The commander gave the order to fire.
No one moved.
Fire, he roared, throat-splitting. Still, his soldiers stood frozen, transfixed by the sight of prey that refused to bow. Some clutched their weapons as if they might turn them inward. Others simply turned and walked into the night, vanishing without a word. The commander's blade shook in his grip. For the first time, he understood the silence at dawn. It was not emptiness. It was the sound of his power dying. Above, the fleet was tearing itself apart. Signals crackled through the night, ships mutinying, captains refusing to fire on each other, some turning their guns inward in madness. The Empire's iron chain was snapping link by link, and the story of the siege was the hammer that broke it. Still the commander stood, trapped in his own pride. He would not flee. If the galaxy was to watch, let them see a hunter die with his blade in hand. The humans kept coming. The closer they marched, the clearer their faces became, scarred, hollow-cheeked, but alive. Some bore wounds that should have killed them. Some leaned on each other, half-limping. But their eyes burned, every one of them, lit by the same coal fire that had carried them through the 1,000 nights. The commander bared his teeth. He would not kneel. He would not surrender. He raised his blade high, claws slick with sweat and ichor. "I am Arxith," he howled, voice breaking. "I am the hunter of 1,000 worlds." The hollow man stopped. The march ceased with him, torches held aloft, the silence settling heavier than any roar. He stared at the commander with those burning eyes, rifle pointed like a spear. No words came from his mouth. None were needed. The commander's breath came ragged. His army was gone. His fleet was ash. The Empire was fracturing. And in front of him stood prey that had remade itself into something he had no name for. The hollow man lowered his rifle. And the humans surged forward. The commander swung his blade, roaring, but the tide swallowed him. Hands dragged him down, boots crushed his limbs, torchlight flared and vanished. His scream was short, cut off like all the others. The Arxith hunters who remained watched in silence. None moved to save him. None even spoke. The humans had claimed the ruins, and with it, the night itself. From orbit, deserters carried the tale outward. They spoke of a commander devoured by prey, of an army shattered not by weapons but by endurance. They spoke of the hollow man, who rose each dawn no matter how many times he was cut down. And every retelling spread further cracks through the Empire's heart. Worlds that had bent knee began to rise. Colonies whispered of rebellion. Chains loosened. The Arxith priests screamed louder than ever, calling for purges and fire, but their words were swallowed by doubt. The hunters could no longer trust their own silence. And still, on that ruined world, the humans stood in the dawnlight, shadows stretched long behind them. The silence at dawn was no longer a weapon of the Arxith. It belonged to humanity. And the galaxy had begun to listen. The story of the siege bled across the stars faster than the Arxith could strangle it. At first, it was whispers, carried by deserters, by half-broken calms, by smugglers who had seen the smoke still rising from the fortress world. But whispers grew teeth. They turned into stories traded in market stalls, in prison blocks, in the hushed corners of conquered halls. The prey had not died. Humanity had endured 1,000 nights and broken the silence at dawn. The Empire tried to crush the rumor. Priests declared it a lie, hunters executed anyone who spoke the name of the Hollow Man. Entire colonies were purged to cauterize the wound. But purges only fed the fire. The story spread like rot in the bones of the Empire. The first cracks came in forgotten corners. On a mining moon, a work crew refused to kneel at roll call. When their overseers drew blades, the miners did not plead or flee, they kept standing, jaws clenched, eyes burning with the same defiance the humans had shown. The overseers cut them down, but others stood in their place. That moon was silent by nightfall, and when the priests sent their hymns across the void, no voice answered back. On another world, the story of the Hollow Man was carved into walls in blood and ash. No one admitted to doing it, yet every prisoner swore they had seen him in their dreams, standing at dawn with his rifle raised. The guards grew restless. Some shot their own reflections in panic. Some simply opened the gates and walked away. The Arksith Empire was built on certainty that prey bent and broke. But now that certainty was gone. The Hollow Man had become a specter. Hunters muttered of him in the dark, swearing they had seen his shadow in the corner of their eyes, heard his boots on stone floors that should have been empty. Fleets on distant assignments fired into nothing, convinced they had seen humans walking through the void. The laughter followed them. The Empire turned inward, tearing at itself. Fleets were recalled from the edge of conquest to police their own ranks. Priests demanded purges on worlds that had never rebelled, claiming the infection of defiance spread unseen. In the confusion, rebellions lit like firestorms. A single spark of refusal became a blaze across whole systems. Chains shattered. Garrisons were overwhelmed not by weapons, but by prey that refused to cower. And all the while, humanity stirred in its grave of ruins. On the fortress world, the survivors dug themselves from ash. They were gaunt and hollow-eyed, their bodies ragged with scars, but they stood tall. The Hollow Man moved among them like a shadow given flesh, never speaking more than he had to, never needing to. When he lifted his rifle, the broken became whole, the scattered became legion. Their fortress, once meant to cage them, had become a beacon. Fires burned in the ruins, a signal visible even from orbit. Deserters came first, Arksith who had fled their collapsing fleets, too terrified to return home, too broken to keep fighting. Some came to kill the humans and redeem themselves. None succeeded. Most came simply to kneel, weapons dropped, eyes empty. The humans did not kill them. They let them kneel, let them live in silence. And that silence was worse than death. The hunters who had once mocked prey now carried their weapons for them, their claws dull, their voices gone. War followed. Slaves ate exiles, survivors from other species dragged into the Empire's chains. They came to the fortress like pilgrims, drawn by the story of the siege. They found not gods, not saviors, but people thin, scarred, still coughing blood. People who refused to die. And that was enough. The Hollow Man stood at the center of it all. He did not claim command. He did not speak of empire or conquest. But his silence ruled stronger than any oath. When he walked, they followed. When he raised his rifle, they raised theirs. The commander's death was never spoken of, yet his absence echoed louder than his fury ever had. The Arksith who had watched him fall spread the truth: the hunter had been swallowed by prey. His empire would follow. In the heart of the spiral arms, the priests wailed in desperation. They ordered the fleets to descend in full strength, to burn the fortress world to cinders, to end the story once and for all.
But the fleets no longer obeyed. Half mutinied before they could even leave dock.
Others vanished into the void, captains swearing they would not face the silence at dawn.
A few did make the jump, dragging their unwilling crews with them, but what they found was not prey huddled in ruin. They found an army. Not vast. Not armored.
Not the kind of army the Arxith understood. But an army of the broken, the scarred, the hollow-eyed.
Humans and others beside them. Torchlight gleamed on scavenged rifles, on blades beaten from scrap.
And at their front, the Hollow Man, his shadow long across the battlefield.
The fleets hesitated. The first captain ordered fire. His cannons roared, tearing through the ruins once more.
But when the smoke cleared, the humans still stood. Their torches still burned.
And the silence pressed heavier than the cannon's thunder. The second captain refused the order.
He turned his guns on the first, shattering his hull, scattering fire across the void. The fleets broke into chaos, tearing themselves apart above the very world they were meant to crush.
And below, the humans did not move.
They waited, rifles steady, eyes fixed upward, until the skies rained with wreckage. It was then that the galaxy understood.
The Empire was not being defeated by weapons. It was being devoured by silence.
The prey would not die.
And if prey could endure, then no chain would hold forever. The galaxy was unraveling.
One rumor had become 100 uprisings, and those uprisings became wars the Empire could not contain. Every chain that had once defined the Arxith grip snapped under the same weight, defiance.
Not rebellion with fleets and banners, rebellion born of silence at dawn.
On worlds that had long been broken, the people simply stopped kneeling.
Overseers shouted, priests demanded sacrifice, but the silence answered louder.
Hunters struck them down, yet for every one that fell, 2 more stood in their place. The cycle mirrored what had happened on the fortress world. The Arxith tried to bury it, and the buried kept rising.
The priests sent fleets to purge entire systems, to smother the infection of refusal.
But fleets arrived to find empty barracks, officers executed by their own men, ships that had turned guns inward. The story of the Hollow Man had spread too far.
Crews muttered of seeing him in their dreams, walking down their corridors, rifle dragging across metal.
Some swore they heard human laughter behind the bulkheads.
Entire squadrons abandoned their posts rather than face it.
At the center of it all, the fortress world burned like a beacon. What had once been rubble was now a gathering point.
The humans no longer stood alone.
Refugees from a dozen species came crawling out of the void, drawn by the myth.
Some arrived chained, their Arxith masters dragging them to be executed in public spectacle.
But when dawn broke, those masters were gone, their ships abandoned, and the slaves walked free into the ruins.
The Hollow Man never gave a speech, never claimed a throne. He simply walked. His silence pulled others in like gravity.
When he lifted his rifle, it was not just the humans who raised theirs anymore. Scaled hands, furred claws, wings, tendrils, each alien held their scavenged weapon high, their eyes burning with the same defiance. The Arxith called it infection. They were right. The infection spread along trade routes, smuggler paths, prison ships. The laughter reached worlds that had never seen a human face.
And yet they knew. They understood.
If prey could endure, then hunters were no longer gods.
The Empire lashed out. Entire sectors were drowned in fire. Cities burned to glass, oceans boiled, atmospheres stripped. The Arksith believed terror would restore their dominion. Instead, it hollowed them further. For each atrocity, 10 more whispered the name of the Hollow Man. For each purge, another system fell into silence. The priests ordered that every mention of humanity be erased. Archives were purged, monuments destroyed, even the word itself banned under threat of execution. But words are harder to kill than bodies. Carved into walls, scratched into stone, whispered between prisoners, it endured. The Empire had ruled through fear, but now fear belonged to them. Hunters no longer trusted the silence at dawn. They watched the shadows too closely, waiting for gaunt figures to rise from the ash. They fired into empty air. They turned on each other. Entire fleets starved in orbit, paralyzed by their own terror. The Hollow Man became more than a soldier. He became the shape of inevitability. His march echoed across worlds he had never touched. When dawn came, Prey stood taller, remembering his coalfire eyes, his broken rifle raised. And so the fortress world turned from grave to birthplace. Out of the ash came an army, not vast, not gleaming, but endless in its will. Humans walked at its front, but around them marched the freed, miners with scarred hands, children who had only ever known chains, warriors from conquered species who had forgotten what victory felt like. Now they remembered. They had no fleet. No empire. Just torches, scavenged rifles, and the silence at dawn. And that was enough to shatter the spiral arms. The Arksith Empire convulsed. Systems peeled away in waves. Colonies refused taxes, governors vanished, fleets mutinied mid-jump. The priests screamed of heresy, demanded fire, but their own bodyguards no longer listened. On the capital itself, walls shook with riots. Chains broke in the plazas where generations had knelt. The hunters still killed. They still burned worlds. But every death echoed now, every silence turned against them. The harder they struck, the louder the defiance grew. The commander's death became legend. Some said the Hollow Man tore his heart out with bare hands. Others said he was swallowed by the earth itself, dragged screaming into the tunnels he had once bombarded. None of it mattered. What mattered was that the hunter had fallen, and the prey had walked away. The Hollow Man himself remained in the ruins. He did not chase the Empire. He did not need to. The Empire was collapsing under its own weight, crumbling from within. He simply stood at dawn, rifle in hand, and the galaxy burned around him. But whispers said he would march soon. That when the time was right, when the silence had spread far enough, he and his people would step out from the fortress and begin walking across the stars. Not to conquer. Not to build an empire. But to remind the hunters what it meant to bleed and keep standing. And when that march began, no chain in the galaxy would hold. The last stars over the fortress world dimmed as if even light itself hesitated to bear witness. The ruins smoldered, not with fire, but with breath, thousands of them, gathered in silence, waiting. Humans at the front, the broken behind them, the freed scattered among them. No banners, no anthems. Just the weight of 1,000 nights carved into their eyes. The Hollow Man stood at their head. His rifle, scarred and bent, still hung in his hands. The wind pulled across the shattered walls, carrying the memory of screams that no longer belonged to the hunters. He did not speak. He had never needed to. The silence said enough.
Above, the sky cracked. The Arksith had sent a fleet, one of their last true armadas, 300 ships strong, circling like vultures. They had burned half a sector to reach him. Priests aboard their flagships spat fury into the void. Their sermons promised the end of the Hollow Man, the cleansing of his plague. Their voices thundered across the channels, demanding kneeling, demanding surrender. No reply came. The first strike fell. Fire rained across the ruins. Whole blocks vanished in a roar of plasma, the ground shuddering as towers collapsed. Dust smothered the air, choking lungs, staining faces. The army of the broken did not scatter. They stood unmoving, their silence cutting sharper than any scream. The priests shouted again, their certainty faltering. Another strike. Another. Fire carved the earth open. Still the figures in the dust did not move. From orbit, the hunters saw only stillness. The fleet commanders whispered of traps, of mines buried in rubble, of cloaked weapons waiting. But there was nothing. Only prey refusing to die properly. Then one human stepped forward. A child, no older than 10 by their years, skin blackened with ash. She picked up a shard of steel, lifted it above her head, and screamed, a sound too small to matter, yet it cracked across every channel. It was not a scream of pain. It was defiance. And as if a cord had been cut, the silence shattered. Not with panic, but with rising voices. Humans, scaled allies, furred soldiers, chittering freed, every throat tore open at once. Not in words. Not in prayers. Just the raw cry of beings who had bled long enough. The sound rolled up through the sky, a storm of defiance that made even the warships pause. The Hollow Man raised his rifle. The ground erupted. The ruins themselves came alive. Hidden caches exploded open, scavenged weapons rising from the ash. Rail fire tore into the sky, crude artillery hammered upward, scavenged starfighters screamed out from broken hangars long thought buried. The prey had not been waiting to die. They had been waiting for the moment the hunters leaned close enough to strike. The first Arksith dreadnought lit up, its hull splitting apart in a storm of fire. Screams echoed across their channels, and the fleet buckled. Ships swerved, firing wildly into the ruins. But the swarm below did not scatter. For every blast that landed, more rose from the dust, their cries drowning out the thunder of bombardment. The Hollow Man did not look at the sky. He walked forward. Through collapsing walls, through fire and blood. Those around him followed. The march began in rubble, but it did not stop there. The hunters broke ranks. Some ships fled, their captains refusing to face the myth they had been sent to kill. Others fought, but every strike against the ruins cost them dearly. The silence at dawn had turned into something louder, heavier, impossible to drown out. The fortress world became a wound the Arksith could no longer close. And as the fleet burned above, a message carried itself farther than any ship could travel. Not spoken, not written. It lived in the sight of the Hollow Man walking through fire with an army behind him. It lived in the scream of the ash-covered child who had raised her shard of steel. It spread faster than any order, faster than any purge. Across stars, across chains, across galaxies. The prey were no longer prey. The Hollow Man raised his head. His eyes, black with ash and fury, met the burning sky. He lifted his rifle not toward the Arksith ships that still circled, but outward, past the stars themselves, as if pointing to something greater. The broken army cheered. The ruins shook with it. And for the first time in their history, the hunters felt hunted. Far beyond, in systems untouched by war, others felt it. Slaves on distant mines looked up as if hearing the cry. Governors in untouched cities woke from nightmares they could not shake. Fleets on patrol turned their weapons inward, unsure who the enemy really was. The hollow man walked forward. The ruins fell behind him. His march had no end, only direction. The galaxy watched, holding its breath. And somewhere, far in the dark beyond the stars, something else stirred. Something older than the Arxith. Something that had waited in silence for prey stubborn enough to last 1,000 nights. The hunters had awakened more than defiance. And the dawn that followed would not be theirs.